Hello there. Today I was going to take a look at a widely distributed and popular Rioja. This is Vinedo del Contino's Reserva 2018. Contino was created as a company in 1973 and it was created as a joint venture between the owners of Finca San Rafael and the directors of CVNE, CUNE as they're sometimes known, the Compañía Viticola del Norte de España, large and at that stage well established. They'd been established for about 100 years by that stage, Rioja producer. The brand was created on an estate concept, as if you were creating a chateau. So there's a single 62 hectare vineyard which sits in a meander in the river Ebro at a place called La Sierra, which is near Laguardia in the Rioja Alavesa region. So the idea was this would be a wine that was made very much like a Bordeaux chateau. The situation here is that vineyards sit in the shadow of the Cerro de la Mesa, Table Mountain. Here they're particular soils, which are an alluvial pebble with limestone, are planted to a number of different micro plots according to the aspect of the different portions of the vineyard. But the vineyard sits in a whole block, and it surrounds an old house, which is the company's headquarters. There a new winery has been built, but the 16th century cellars of the old house are still used for maturing the wines. And in fact, the name Contino comes from a group, the King's Guard, a group of 100 men, and one of them, presumably an officer, Don Pedro de Samaniega, who had been granted this land as a result of his service to the king. When it comes to harvest, the harvest here is entirely done by hand, and each of the micro plots within the vineyard is picked separately. They're quite selective. They certainly had to be in 2018 because it was a very wet vintage, and yet actually the winery feels they still ended up with a really good result. So they had to work very hard to select the healthiest and the best fruit because it was, as I say, very wet vintage, and there was a fair amount of rainfall during harvest. So the plots, as I say, are vinified separately and aged separately to create blending options, basically. At the winery, the fruit's destemmed. It's fermented in a mixture of temperature-controlled stainless steel tanks and old concrete fermenters. Fermentation temperatures are kept down to sort of 28 to 30 degrees C to stop the extraction of tannins being too extreme, to moderate that. And a period of maceration went on during and after fermentation that lasted for 15 to 20 days. The wine underwent malolactic conversion and was then moved into oak. The oak treatment on this, I don't know how much was new or not, but is 90% of French oak barrels and 10% of American, and the wine stayed in those for 18 months. Subsequent to aging in barrel, the wine was bottled. It's labelled as being vegetarian and vegan friendly, so I would assume there is no fining with animal products at that stage. The wine then continued to age in bottle in the company's cellars for a further year before it was released. As I say, this is a fairly widely produced brand, and there were around 300,000 bottles made in 2018. This, in fact, is bottle number 208,553. The blend of the wine is predominantly Tempranillo, 86%. There's 6% of Mausuelo, 6% of Graciano, and the remaining 2% is Garnacha. So from a predominantly Tempranillo wine from the cooler Alevesa region of Rioja, I'm expecting a relatively structured wine with good acidity, lovely freshness, elegance, balance, and the ability to age. So let's see what we make of it, shall we? I mean, first, I'm looking at the colour, and even from a distance, you can see the rim is not particularly dark. There's a vibrant ruby red to the colour. There is a sort of a slightly darker core, but it's certainly not opaque. It's quite easy to see the stem of the glass through wine as I look down through it. The wine's label lists it as having 14% alcohol. It's forming slight tears on the glass, that's not surprising, but they're not major. Let's see what we make of the aromas, shall we? There's a lovely ripe, fresh red fruit side of things there. There's a depth and a richness, and there's really some quite obvious oak character, which is nicely blended in with the fruit. So you start with a plummy, rich red fruit. In that there are notes of sort of vanilla-y and cedary oak. There's sweet spice there. There's a little bit of dustiness perhaps. There's a touch of licorice, perhaps a hint of leather. It's a fairly complex nose. I mean, it's not simply primary fruit, it's got some sort of development aromas. So let's have a taste, shall we? Initially there's a fresh red fruit, red cherries, raspberry, that sort of nicely lifted by some fresh acidity. A slight touch of spice, maybe that's a raspberry note there. Slowly the tannins start to kick in. There's a sort of a slightly drying, grainy note to the tannin. The tannins are fine. The wine is medium, maybe just slightly above medium bodied, but not enormously so. There is this drying, more sort of rich, dark, red, ripe plum note to the mid palate, and then some more sort of cedary notes on the tannin starts to come in, and it starts to become a little more drying, and there's a little bit of grip on the mid palate. The alcohol at 14% is sort of running out the fruit. It's making it seem a little sort of warm and maybe a tiny touch volatile. There's a slightly lifted, sort of jammy, pruny note at this stage. Moving on to the finish, a sweet spice note coming from the oak, so there's a sort of vanilla note, but actually there's enough acidity that's combining with a little bit of red fruit, so that there's a sort of a slight vanilla and raspberry note to the finish. There's a riper, rich plum note there as well, and the finish is of fair length, but actually the tannins are closing it up just a little. So, you know, maybe this is a wine that would be best off returned to in maybe 2 years or so, once those tannins have calmed down a little, the fruit has opened up a bit more, and you'll see a bit, maybe slightly more developed, but a bit more of that sort of richer, ripe red fruit that's coming through there. The acidity, as I say, was evident on the attack. There was a little bit of it on the finish. It's balanced, it's in there quite nicely. The alcohol is adding roundness, but it's not marring the fruit particularly, so again, reasonably well balanced. In terms of aging capacity, I mean, I don't think there'd be any trouble keeping this for sort of 5, 6, 7, 8 years, maybe up to 10. And this style of Rioja probably will age for longer than that, but it will start to become quite developed, and you'll be getting a lot more of the sort of the forest floor and truffle sort of notes that you're getting from an older wine stage. So yes, this is Contino's 2018 Reserva. I think it actually showed some lovely elegance. The red fruit on the palate is you know, delicious. It's mouth-watering. There's a lovely purity to it. There's a fine structure that probably gives the wine the ability to age. I think this has a high degree of typicity, the sort of thing that we're looking for from an Alevesa Rioja. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have, please do like and share. Do also leave your comments. We'd love to hear what you think either about this wine, other wines, wines from the Rioja region, or the videos we're making. That would be fantastic. Do consider signing up and following us on YouTube. We'd love your support, but most importantly, do try and join us online for another video tasting in the very near future, won't you? Thank you very much. Goodbye for now.